So in this video, you're going to learn more about non-periodical sources. So let's first define a non-periodical. If a periodical is something that is published at a regular interval, then a non-periodical is the opposite, something that is published only occasionally or intermittently. Let's look at some examples. Books, traditional books, reference books, and anthologies or collections. I'm going to talk more about all of these in a few moments. And then, of course, what most of us are probably using, websites. This includes newspapers and magazines that are published online, web reference sources such as Wikipedia, and online videos such as those you might see on YouTube or even TED Talks. Reference sources provide general information and overviews of larger topics. They usually contain summaries of facts, histories, and other general research. They're most useful in the early stages of research to give you a general sense of the topic when you're just getting started. They can also provide you with recommendations for more in-depth sources. And don't forget about databases for reference research. Our library's database collection has some really great reference sources to get you started. These are generally considered to be more authoritative than Wikipedia because they've been through a more rigorous editing process. So let's talk for a few minutes about Wikipedia. You have probably heard from a teacher somewhere in your life that you shouldn't use Wikipedia for research. I am not that teacher. I happen to love Wikipedia. I think it's freaking awesome. We can learn so much from it. However, we do need to use it with caution. We need to use it very intelligently. So I'm going to go through a bit of a search and highlight a few things that I just want you to pay attention to when you are using Wikipedia for research. So I'm going to just jump into the topic of police brutality. And Wikipedia is going to make some suggestions. And while ultimately I know I want to focus on police brutality in the United States, I want to show you what happens when I go to this page. So one of the first things we need to look for are the warnings that Wikipedia has so kindly inserted for us. Big red exclamation caution sign, the heading that tells us there are all kinds of problems with this page. They're inviting you to contribute to editing if you so desire, but what's really important to know is that when we see something like this, we should probably stay away. There is the possibility that there are some good resources down below, but my instinct tells me I probably just don't want to use this source at all. So I'm going to go back to my search page. I'm going to try again. And I already knew I wanted to focus on police brutality in the United States anyway, so I'm going to go to that page. And here I don't see the same warning that I saw on the previous entry. So this is a typical reference source, right? It gives us a general overview, history, we've got contents, I can skip to specific subtopics. Hopefully these are things you all already know about Wikipedia. If you're an avid user, you probably already know what I'm going to suggest, but just in case you don't or you need a reminder, I'm going to suggest it anyway. So one of the best things about Wikipedia, in my opinion, is the resources, the references pages. This one happens to be extensive. So this particular Wikipedia entry has a lot of citations in it. That's what all of these numbers do. They're helping us to know that the information here wasn't made up, that it actually links to a source. But what I think is a better use of this page is to actually look through and use some of these sources. Here we have a book. Let's see what happens. Can I go to that book? Internet Archive, limited book preview. I could borrow this book for 14 days. That's pretty exciting. So if I wanted to get that article or look more into that source, I can do it there. If I knew that I wanted to do something specifically with body cams, I might click on this and see what I find. Here looks like a website article. And so this is another source I could potentially use. It's probably more in-depth than Wikipedia anyway. So this resource is functioning as a reference source should. It gives us a general overview. We can start to learn some of the terms. This also might give us search terms. One of the search terms that came up when I was searching police brutality before was excessive force. So that might be another possible search term to use. But what I really want to emphasize here is the value of the references and then the further reading. Here's an Atlantic article, an article from The Guardian. So this is a really great way to use Wikipedia as a reference source. Hopefully you already know what a book source is. I know that we are increasingly relying on books much less than we once did, but books are books. Generally speaking, when conducting research, books can provide more in-depth research on both broad and narrow topics. They're usually available in both print and electronic formats, which is what you see here. If you're researching mass incarceration, you could buy a hard copy of Michelle Alexander's The New Jim Crow, or you could try to borrow it from your library's overdrive. Books are usually published only once, although sometimes revised or updated editions will become available. Books often have tables of contents and/or indexes that can help you focus in on a particular subtopic. They also often contain their own bibliographies or works cited, usually in the back of the book, which you can use for further research, similar to what you would do if you were using a reference source. Anthologies or collections are also book and/or ebook sources. These contain articles, essays, or other short sources. So they're usually larger containers organized around a particular topic. The example I'm giving in the visuals is the topic of police brutality. And then within that book, you're going to have a bunch of different articles and essays. These articles are usually written by a variety of authors. Sometimes the contents were written by just one person, and this is more likely the case of an anthology of poems by Robert Frost or Emily Dickinson, or really any poet, the collected works of so-and-so. The kind of collections that you're probably going to use for research are the ones that are going to have a variety of authors and viewpoints expressed. In the case of multi-author collections, the articles were often published somewhere else before they were included in the collection, and this requires its own specific type of citation knowledge and information. Similar to books and references, they include tables of contents to help you easily locate specific subtopics, and they often include multiple perspectives, as in the Opposing Viewpoints series. Let's take a closer look at that series now. The Opposing Viewpoints is kind of a special type of collection. They've been around for a long time. They started out just with books, and what they would do, the editors would take a topic and they would kind of comb through other sources, magazines, newspapers, even academic journals, and they would get permission to republish those articles in their book. Some of these articles were written specifically for the Opposing Viewpoint series. So what they might do is find an expert in the subtopic that they're working on and ask that person to write an article just for their book. More often, the articles were published elsewhere first, and then they get reproduced in that particular collection. While many of the collections have been published as books, All of the content is available on the Opposing Viewpoints database, including articles that were born digital, which basically means that they were published exclusively in electronic form. Just like other sources that we've looked at already, these also include tables of contents that can help you easily locate specific subtopics. Now let's take a closer look at how the Opposing Viewpoints database operates to provide access to the collection in the Opposing Viewpoints series. So let's say I'm continuing my research on police brutality. And I get all kinds of sources where it's broken down for me in terms of the different types of sources I can get here. But what I'm going to focus on right now is what Opposing Viewpoints calls the viewpoints. So they break it into both featured viewpoints and viewpoints themselves. And when I come to the first couple of results, that's how they've organized it. So let's click into featured viewpoints first. And what I have here, again, are a variety of sources that are all about the subtopic of police brutality. I can see here, this one is an article from the Washington Post. Which is a newspaper. Here's a New York Times article. Here is one from the Gale Opposing Viewpoints online collection. So let's take a look at that. So the Opposing Viewpoints online collection is the born digital Opposing Viewpoints book about police brutality. Meaning that this book, or I guess I can call it a book, this source isn't available in print. It's only available online through the Opposing Viewpoints database, but it has been written for the specific Opposing Viewpoints topic of police brutality. That's why it says here that it's a viewpoint essay. That's what that means. Okay, now I see I have a series of articles that come from a source called Police Brutality, which suggests to me that that is one of the books that was published under that topic. And here are some of the clues. They call it a viewpoint essay, and it says 2016. And if I go through all of these, I see the same information. It's from Police Brutality. It's all 2016. They're all called viewpoint essays. So if I wanted to, I could probably find that book, Police Brutality, as a book and borrow it as a book. Though it's really not necessary to do that since I can access all the essays here online. So let's take a look at one of them. This one is called There is Conflicting Information on Police Brutality. Now, I want to pay careful attention to the citation information here because whenever an article on opposing viewpoints is part of a collection, there's a strong likelihood that this was published somewhere else first. And that information is something that we're going to need when we start putting the source into noodletools. So this is the title that Opposing Viewpoints gave to this source when they put it in their collection. The book called Police Brutality. This information article commentary gives me more information about how the source was originally published. The author, John Wiebe, the original title was Excessive or Reasonable Force by Police, ? Research on Law Enforcement and Racial Conflict. And the original source was something called Journalist Resource, which is something I'm going to have to look up if I want to know more about what that source is. So let's just say, for sake of time, that I've decided I want to use this source and I want to put it into noodletools. So I'm going to go to my noodletools project and click on sources. I'm going to click new source, and as always, I have to know how I access the source. It doesn't matter what it was originally because I entered it from a database. But now I have to know what it was originally. And this is where this information is helpful. This tells me that it was an article that's been reprinted in the opposing viewpoints database. So if I scroll all the way to the bottom, I'm going to see in the MLA citation that that information is here. So I'm going to use that to help me complete my noodletools citation. I'm going to click reprinted article. And now I have to know even more. Was it a journal? Was it a magazine? Was it a newspaper? Was it a book? I think noodletools needs to add to here, was it a website? Because that's often what happens, but they don't have that choice right now. I'm not actually sure, so I'm going to Google this source, journalistresource.org, research on today's news topics from the Harvard Kennedy School. This to me looks like a website or a web page. I can't call it a newspaper or a magazine. But let's just look at this to get a better sense. This was just an article, which we would consider to be a web page published in this larger container journalist resource. Well, it definitely seems to be non-periodical source, so I wouldn't technically cite it as a newspaper. I don't have the choice of citing it as a website. And ultimately, what's going to happen when I export the citation is that it's not going to matter too much if I choose magazine or newspaper, because they end up exporting similarly. So I'm going to pick newspaper. And noodletools is going to give me the fields to hopefully input the correct information. So name of the database we already discussed is opposing viewpoints. For my URL, remember that I always need to find that stable URL. So we're going to get the link, select copy, put that in noodletools. Today's my most recent date of access. Article authors. Now I'm going to go back here. Who's my author? John Wybe. I like to copy and paste any names that might be hard for me to remember the spelling when I'm doing it quickly. There's only one author. The article title. Okay, so this is important. We need to find the title of the source as it was originally published, because right now this field is for newspaper articles. I'm not worried about the database source yet. I'm coming to that in a moment. So this is the title from the original source. And remember that I'm going to double check that it has been punctuated correctly. And noodletools isn't yelling at me, so that sounds pretty good. What was the source? They're calling it name of newspaper. It's really just the name of the container, the website, because we know it's not actually a newspaper. We're not going to worry about publication city, publication date, April 8th, 2015. I don't have an edition. I don't have page numbers. This seems to be a reprint, although they're going to tell me reproduce with permission. If I go to the bottom, it does not say excerpt. So that tells me it's a full reprint. And that's the difference. A reprint is going to be the entire article, and excerpt will just be part of it. The title of section or work in the anthology, if different from the original title, that is in fact what we have. Remember, we talked about how this is the title that that opposing viewpoints gave to the article when it appears in their collection. So that's what they're asking for here. This is the anthology information. I'm going to enter it, and it looks again like it's been formatted correctly in terms of the caps. Pages of the work in the anthology. Let's see if I have that. If I downloaded a PDF, I might be able to get that, but I don't need to do that. I can use the web version, and since it's searchable, I actually don't need to include page numbers. Roles, contributors to the anthology as a whole. Let's see if I can find that. Here it tells me edited by Michael Ruth. And if I come up to the top, that information is there as well. So since that has been displayed prominently, it's easy to find that information. I am going to include it, that the editor is Michael Ruth. Title of the anthology is Police Brutality. It's not a multi-volume set, so I don't need any of that information. The publisher is Gale. The year of publication was 2016. I don't need the publication city. There's no indication that this is a specific edition, and it is from the Opposing Viewpoints series. So I'm going to pop that in right there. There is no series number, so I'm done. And here is my citation. It looks pretty similar, I think, to the one on the bottom here. So these are getting better, Opposing Viewpoints. It seems to be the same, although there's an extra comma there, which looks wrong. Again, sometimes these are going to be right, but I do recommend using these to fill in the correct fields in noodletools, because that's going to help. Well, I don't want to say guarantee, it's going to increase the likelihood that there aren't going to be silly mistakes when you're outputting. Also remember that noodletools will alphabetize and double space and use Times New Roman. And this doesn't have the correct font. So if you just copy and paste this into a Google Doc, you're going to have formatting errors. Okay, so that is how to find and cite the information for an article that has been published as part of a collection in noodletools. Of course, no lesson on research or sources would be complete without a little discussion of the World Wide Web. When you're conducting web research, your number one rule is to always carefully evaluate web sources for timeliness, accuracy, and overall reliability. If you're not sure how to do this, please see the video on evaluating sources. Websites and web pages are updated intermittently, which is why they are considered non-periodicals. This is true even when you're accessing a newspaper or magazine article online, so just remember that when you cite those, you're citing those as web pages. Don't limit your research to the web. Although it might seem easier at first because it's familiar and comfortable, databases can often provide more useful and credible sources. They're often more in-depth, they're often more specific, and they're going to give you the kinds of details that you need to develop a really strong argument. Invest a little time learning how to use them. This will pay off in the long run. And finally, when citing web sources, always include the date of access in your citation, because websites and web pages can be updated and even deleted at any time. Including the date of access helps ensure that you don't get accused of including invalid information.